what do you think is the hardest part or that people misunderstand about the news right now?
It's really designed to capture your attention and to stress you out.
When you're digesting the large amount of information, I'm wondering if you can walk us through some of that, because I think those are the skills we need when we're turning around and telling our children about these things.
Let go of this whole idea you have to be perfect or you're going to explain it perfectly. Let that go. Just be accurate.
What do we owe ourselves, our kids, our community when it comes to self-education?
Ooh, this is so important.
Welcome to Care and Feeding, the show where we talk about the ups, downs, and everything in between when it comes to parenting. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Blair Imani. Blair is an educator, historian, and mental health advocate. One of the many things she's known for is an amazing series called Smarter in Seconds, which I can't wait to talk about. She's also the co-host of Thoughts About Feelings podcast with one of the internet's favorite librarians, Michael, and she's the author of 3 books. Her latest is called Read This to Get Smarter. Blair, I am so thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. You don't just have Blair, but you also have baby Smarty. So for those who are just listening and not with video, if you hear little coos in the background, it's my little baby.
I love that. We actually we're waiting for you to come off of maternity leave to have you on the show now that you are a parent.
Yeah, you asked me earlier and I was like, well, I'm not qualified yet. I haven't been a parent. But now that I've been a parent for at least a couple months, I feel qualified.
And can we just get it? How is parenthood treating you? Are you just loving it? Or is
I'm
it
loving
it.
And I keep telling people that I have so much help, because I think sometimes when people see, first of all, we live in this very toxic, sexist, patriarchal society. And I think sometimes women are pitted against each other. And so I want to always be really transparent that the reason why I'm able to continue making Smarter in Seconds and doing my keynote speeches and, going to events is because my husband is super active, because my parents live close by, because we were able to hire help. So just being super transparent that this is a production and I'm not the only player. It's a team sport. And I think that's really what's made the difference, because I know my mental health would be so different if I didn't have the support that I do. And so I've been really grateful for that and really open about it, because, it's given me such a reverence. I have somebody coming to, I'm getting some blood work done, and I was talking to the nurse, and as we were talking, she was like, oh yeah, I'm a mom of twins. And I was like, I keep having a nightmare that my baby is a twin, and it keeps scaring me. So I just want to say I have so much reverence for the single parents, for the parents of twins, because y'all are warriors. So yeah, woo-wee.
That's amazing. Blair, I love that, because I'm a big fan of the community parenting aspect. And it's something I feel like on the show, I'm always trying to talk about, that we are not designed to do this alone, and we are supposed to have a community. And that I think is one of the reasons, I love you even on social media, is you do in addition to educating us and helping us learn more about all sorts of things, you also have built a community. And I love now that your family is in that community. Have you found that to be your group supportive of you being a parent? Have there been surprising things about now being a parent in this internet community?
What I will say shocked me the most is that as soon as I announced that I was pregnant, people started calling me mama. And I, 1, didn't know that would happen. And 2, didn't realize it would piss me off so much. I was so enraged. I don't know if that was the direction of my postpartum rage, but I think it was, because it would just oh my goodness, I would get warm in the face. Just be no, my name's not mama. I'm her mama, but I'm not your mama. And then I realized for some people, it's really validating, because it helps them feel like they're coming into this new era. And so I totally respect that. But for me, it felt like a loss of identity. I'm my name's not mama, it's a Blair. What the heck? So that was interesting. I think it's just when you're sitting in this new identity and sense of self, you never really know how it's going to hit. And anger is not the thing I thought I would be feeling. I think I've chilled out about it a little bit. I've been calling myself I'm a breastfeeding mama, I'm a lactating mama. I'll mention that to folks when I need to manage my milk supply. But I also wanted to make sure that my audience knew that hey, I'm not suddenly going to be posting exclusively parenting stuff. And people were like, even if you did, you always make things educational. So we're happy to stick around. But the latest thing that I'm really excited about is, so I was at the Essence Black Women in Hollywood brunch, and I was on the red carpet representing Planned Parenthood, asking celebrities and artists and, just all these different amazing people about healthcare and bodily autonomy and abortion rights and birth control and all these things. And I realized, oh my goodness, if I leave my spot, I'm going to lose my spot. And I really need to pump.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're pumping on the red carpet. So I pulled out my breast pump and I like buttoned my shirt just so I could like stick the pump there.
Yeah.
So there's a clip on me online now of, working that hand pump that I got from Lancino, and they love it. They're going to be posting it soon too. And I was just like, I didn't realize that me just trying to manage my motherhood journey could be empowering for people. And so there's been people, like even people on the carpet, like older folks, young women too, who are just like, this is so dope to see. I wish I saw this. I wish I heard people talking about how all birth is natural. And so there's like a new kind of corner of activism in it for me.
Yeah.
And it's been like all of my activism, which is just me kind of trying to live my authentic self. And I think more people should realize that. Like sometimes when we want to take action in our community or support people or be an activist, it just means being your most authentic self.
I love that so much. And I do think like one of the things that's hard about being a mom, like you talked about, is this new role, right? And I think because society wants moms to look this particular way, and it's like, no, we are these other people too. Just now we have this additional, like we're raising people, we're pouring in somewhere else, and it can be really hard to get pigeonholed into like, what does it look like to be a mom? And like you said, like, yes, you're a mom, but you're still smarter in seconds, and you're still, like here to educate us about the stuff that yes, new stuff, but also the stuff that always mattered to you. If there are people listening who are not familiar with Smarter in Seconds, can you just tell us a little bit like how that came to be and why they should, if you haven't, go find that and watch some of your stuff?
Oh, for sure. So Smarter in Seconds, people are always learning about it every day, and it's so exciting for me because I'll see people like, oh, I just stumbled upon this. So basically I made Smarter in Seconds because there are so many new things to learn about constantly, and not everyone has time to devote to their, to learning about it. And sometimes those educational materials that you can find online are dull and uninteresting, or they don't make it compelling to like you specifically. And so I try to cover an array of topics and make it vibrant, make it fun, make it interesting. Like, for example, when I do education around how to talk to your partners around STIs, I wore like this 1960s maternity fit. I have background music. It's like a very 1960s PSA. I try to teach people about different things, whether it's like the SAVE Act and how, different ID restrictions might disenfranchise people. I try to make that compelling and interesting. Oh, pause. I think my mom's going to come help me with the baby. Do you want to take
Okay.
Thanks, Mommy. See, this is the village we were just talking about.
Is she asleep?
Yeah, she's asleep.
Oh, goody.
Yay. Okay, so a little backstretch.
Yeah, exactly.
So essentially, Smarter in Seconds is this vehicle for education that makes it interesting, makes it colorful, makes it vibrant. I have a short attention span. I have ADHD. My attention is pulled in a million different directions every single day. So Smarter in Seconds is like, okay, give me 2 minutes today. And today we're going to learn about facial difference, or today we're going to learn about Tourette syndrome, or today we're going to learn about Jim Crow, or today we're going to learn about how expensive it is to be a woman because of patriarchy. And that's my promise. And I hope to get people smarter in seconds in just that little bit of time. And it's been really fun because I get to work with people all around the world, whether it's my friend Funbi, who lives all the way in Nigeria, or working with folks across the United States. I bring them onto the show, and it's just like, what do you need to know in order to get it? And where can you go from here? And it's available on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts.
Yeah, I think it's so great because, like you said, it makes it digestible and something that you can have time for. But I think it's important to know, like, these are not all things that you just know about, right? Like, you're obviously educating yourself to help us be educated. Because I do think in this time, like, I find that a lot of my friends feel like they're supposed to know all of the things about that's like a really big burden.
It's a huge burden, and it's so unrealistic. And I really feel like it's the enemy of progress. Like people are out here trying to be perfect, and sometimes good enough or attempting is the best thing you can do because that's the most realistic thing. So for example, when I was pregnant, I was doing a lot of research around the maternal mortality rate because Black women have really terrible health outcomes. And it's not because our health is bad. It's because sometimes doctors aren't listening to us. They have their own biases that are baked into the care. I had one doctor tell me that we didn't need to treat my anemia because if I hemorrhaged during birth, we could just give me a blood transfusion. Now, hemorrhaging is one of the top reasons that Black women die in childbirth. And so I'm like, red flag, but I happen to know that, right? So in hindsight, I'm like, what the heck? Like, this is like, it's almost like if you were writing an episode of The Pit and you wanted to show a doctor who was being negligent, And so I was able to get care, but I'm like seeing in real time. So as I do this deeper dive, I'm like, okay, well, I just learned about this. I just went on this hyper-focused journey. Let me show and tell everyone. So I teamed up with my friend Andrea McInnes, and she's white, and we just like made a video where it was like, we're both pregnant, but she's more likely to survive her birth than I am. Here's why, and make it really compelling. Or like postpartum mental health. Like I knew I needed to do a deep dive on postpartum mental health because I have mental health struggles already, and I have been going to therapy since I've had the baby. And so I was like, okay, let's do this deep dive. And now I'm going to tell everyone about it. And I'm going to do it with mental health practitioners as well. So I really have a good time with it. My favorite thing when I was in school was show and tell. Lo and behold, now I do show and tell professional.
You're an adult show and tell. That's such a fun way to look at Smarter in Seconds. Like, this is what I learned, and now I want to make sure, like,
yeah, because my thing is like, if I learned it, and now everybody knows me as the Smarter in Seconds lady, but I never really felt smart in school. I live right by JPL and Caltech, and so so many people who I went to school with, their parents were literally astrophysicists. So I never felt like I was like the best. Like I never went up to calculus or like. It was just always a struggle in school. Like I would be struggling. I would give my all for a B, and I would have friends who would like cry over getting an A-. And I was like, okay, so there's different types of smartness. There's different types of intelligence. And so I'm always trying to prove to people, like, if I could learn it, you could learn it. We're all smart. We're all acquiring knowledge, and you don't have to know everything because the information is out there. And I hope to make it compelling and interesting and attractive to learn.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think is the hardest part or that people misunderstand about kind of the news like right now?
I think the biggest thing is that people don't realize how the news, like if you're watching TV, I started watching local news since I've been breastfeeding. I'm sitting down watching a lot of television, and it's really designed to capture your attention and to stress you out. So I think that's the first thing. It's not as though many news programs exist that are like, here's the news delivered in a neutral tone with minimal flashing lights and colors and breaking news alerts, so that way you can internalize it without activating your nervous system. More at 7. Like that's not the way news is. PBS NewsHour, I think, does a good job of that, of kind of delivering it in the most neutral way possible. Not neutral in the sense of like both sides saying something, but just without making it sensationalized. So that's the first thing, is the news is very political. The news is very sensationalized. The news is often kind of dwelling on the same story again and again to make it more sensational. But there's other things, like if we look at research, like if you watch if you look at like news viewership habits, many people will think, okay, well, I just watched my local news and I learned about all of the most dramatic crime instances. But in that same community, crime might even be going down. But that's not how it's depicted online, because they're reporting on the same number of robberies, the same number of homicides. And they should be covering those things, but it kind of gives a misrepresentation of what's happening. The other thing is the news is showing you the worst thing that's happening and not necessarily the people who are making a positive difference. So in addition to Smarter in Seconds, I've also been doing PSAs. And in those PSAs, I try to tie it to something, tangible that you can do. I was talking about the people who are living in like extreme poverty in Mozambique, and how for Ramadan, there's this organization called Give Directly that's doing a zakat fundraiser. And zakat is like Islamic tithing, except it's 2.5% instead of a tenth of what your income is. And so if you go to, givedirectly.org/zakat fund, you can donate to the, to Muslim families there. And so that was my PSA about how, funding to global health aid that's been cut down with, the U.S. aid cuts that happened last year, how that's affecting people and what you can do about it. But oftentimes the news isn't giving you like, and here's what you can do to feel less desperate about the world and not have an existential crisis.
Yeah.
They're kind of just throwing everything at you, so you feel like you need to watch more and more.
And then it's like the world's on fire and you feel that way. And we get so many comments from parents who like, that they're living in this world, right, where there's all this information coming and it's like the world is on fire. It's like, how do we turn around then and talk to our kids about that? I mean, one of the things for me, I have older kids. I have a 13, 11, and 9-year-old, is actually like your Smarter in Seconds are perfect for them. I mean, they're perfect for me too, but like they're also, because it is like you said, it's fun, attention grabbing. It's not like, here, watch this boring thing. But also you're boiling down these things into really manageable chunks. And we don't leave feeling like we know everything, right? Like often we leave feeling like, oh, this is something we should look more into, like if we're interested. But can you, like, when you're digesting the large amount of information to decide what you're going to present, I'm wondering if you can walk us through some of that, because I think those are the skills we need when we're turning around and telling our children about these things.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing I try to convince myself of, and it takes a lot of like, it was easier to do when I was younger because I was just like naive and I was like, I can do anything. It's harder to do that when you get older. But, you know, I think the first thing is to be like, I can get this. I don't understand this now, but I can get this. And I had that so intensely when I was doing a video about cryptocurrency and like deposits and banking. I was like, I will get this. I will understand it. I won't be an expert, but I will be able to like say a few sentences about it. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that like there's sources to verify. One thing I have to do for myself is like, and I think it's important for parents too, is like, let go of this whole idea you have to be perfect or you're going to explain it perfectly. Let that go. Just be accurate. You're not going to be perfect, but you can be accurate. So that's why I always have sources on the screen. And I think it's important for parents to do, because I see parents so often be like, well, I don't want to talk about this, especially when it comes to things like sex ed. Like, but what if I'm wrong? And it's like, okay, well, you're not going to be perfect and it's probably going to be awkward anyway, but at least you can give them accurate information and help people to see, the young people in your life to see that like you're a source that they can come to work things out, to talk things through, and to feel more comfortable in doing that. But not feel like either you're going to get it right or you're going to get it wrong, and that the entire weight falls on your shoulders. The other thing that I do with Smarter in Seconds is I rely on the people who are experts. I refer to them. So if I'm working with, I work with my friend Cyber Farida, who talks all about different ways to protect children online, different ways, whether it's, you know, how to set up parental controls on Roblox and things like that, or to manage screen time. Or Gamer Educator is another great resource to talk about those different things. And so I try to like, okay, well, maybe I can open this lane or I can refer to that person. Yeah. And then again, like I mentioned with parenting, it's a team sport, because I know for myself, like a lot of parents would rely on my mom when it came to talking about sex ed, because she was comfortable to have those conversations and she was sex positive. So it was like, okay, well, everybody's going to Blair's house so that Blair's mom can talk about sex ed, so we don't have to. Or, you know, other parents might take their kids to Planned Parenthood so that their sex educators can talk to them about those things. And my mom actually did that for me. She took me to her internist and was like, you're going to go to the doctor. You're going to ask any question you want to ask that you don't feel comfortable asking me. And I'm like, Mom, I feel comfortable asking you. She's like, you feel like you have to say that, but you don't have to say that. And I'm like, no, Mom, I really do. But, you know, like she really did the best. And so I get a lot of that from my mom, because I think the work of taking big information, making it digestible, making it understandable is such an important skill to use as a parent. The other thing I try to do, and the last thing I'll say, is just distill it to the aha moments. What helped you get from not knowing it to getting it? What was that little transition moment? Because if you can just say that part, that's going to help people open their minds. So when I explain things like intersectionality theory, like when I was learning about that in my gender studies class forever ago in college, I had to read this essay called Demarginalizing the Intersections of Race and Sex. I'm like, okay, I will get this. All right. That's a lot of $10 words, as my dad would say. And we have Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. And then you distill it and it's like, okay, it's about how we have different identities and how those identities overlap and connect to different systems of privilege and oppression, which means that for me, I'm a Black woman, and so I'm impacted by sexism and by racism. But I'm a lighter skinned Black woman, so I benefit from colorism. And then we refer to our experts, Dr. Sarah L. Webb. She's writing an excellent book right now that I got to read early, all about colorism and how we can support people who are marginalized, who are harmed by these different systems that benefit lighter skinned people at the harm of darker skinned people. So we just learned about a whole bunch of concepts, but it's like, okay, now we know where to go to learn more. Now we know who to go to learn more. And now I have at least a cursory understanding of this term, but you don't want to oversimplify it, because I'll see some resources that are like intersectionality. You live at at the corner of Lady Street and Black People Street, and that's where you are. And I'm like, maybe that is a bit too much of a simplification, but it can start to like, it can be the beginning at least. And I think as long as I help people understand like Smarter in Seconds is your place to start, but not where you should be finishing, that's what I hope to do as well.
Let's be honest, life gets messy, families fight, coworkers overstep, partners do weird stuff in bed. Luckily, Slate's advice columnists have seen it all. Sign up for the free Slate Advice newsletter and get our latest takes on sex, parenting, money, and every moral gray area in between, plus exclusive bonus letters delivered straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at slate.com/advice.
I want to play this out a little bit specifically with the conflict in Iran right now and everything that's going on. So we're a military family. I have, like I told you, these older children, but we get a lot of questions about how do we talk about this? How do we handle this? And this is the issue I have. Like, how do I oversimplify, like not oversimplify while still explaining? Because when I start to think about it, it becomes really complicated, right? Like dad's in the military, we believe in service. We also don't believe that everything that's happening is right. I want them to understand that like people in other countries are people and their governments make, do you see how like all of a sudden this becomes so overwhelming for me to try to give the kids a full picture of what's happening? Because I feel compelled, like that's something as a good parent I should do for them to understand that it's complicated and that we can sit with many of these different feelings. But I think what happens is that sometimes I get so overwhelmed in my own lack of understanding how I feel about all of this, right? How much like current like race plays into it and our thoughts about the Middle East. And I get completely like, I think sometimes the kids walk away and are like, whoa,
what?
Which is okay. Yeah. Like that's okay. That is how I feel too. But like, as you look at this, how would you break these issues down? Of course, we don't have to go all the way, but like, can you give a guide of like, how do we start do I start kind of geographically? Like here, let's talk really briefly about the history of what's happening.
Well, I think when it comes to talking to kids, the first thing to do is to help them understand that they're safe. And that's hard to do because sometimes they're not, like, especially when it comes to talking about difficult things like school shootings, like I was thinking about with my postpartum anxiety, like all the ways I need to keep my little baby safe. And
yeah.
Like, what if we talk about this? Are we going to have like a go word? Like are we going to do drills? And so I think the first thing is to talk about like, I'm a safe space for you. Anywhere I am, we're going to be safe together. And like, even if it's not, we might not be safe in our home, but you're safe with me. Okay. Or you're safe here. Start there because that's where a lot of people, I think, especially young people have questions. And then I think another thing we can rely on is that you've had an experience, I'm sure in your life where you needed an adult to explain to you what was happening. For me at my age, it was 9/11. Like I was in, I think, first or second grade. I did not understand what was happening. We live on the West Coast, so my mom kept me home from school that day. So I was like, awesome, we get to stay home from school. And then like I see all the adults huddled around the TV. And I was like, what is happening? And I mean, for my parents, like at the same time, I remember like at school, we had a lot of like ceremonies suddenly that were like really honoring like service, the firefighters, the first responders from 9/11. But then we also had a Muslim family that came and talked to us about Islamophobia. And instead of talking to us about Islamophobia, they just talked to us about what is Islam? Who are Muslims? You've probably heard about Muslims on TV, on the news. Here's what Islam is, and that was actually before I converted to Islam. And that was one of the first times I learned about Islam. So I think one thing is just to recognize that children do see it. Children are aware. But then if you were in that position, what did you need to know at that time? The first thing I needed to know back, in September 2001 was like, well, how does this affect me? Because you're a kid. You're thinking about yourself.
Yes.
Like, you don't really have a big worldview. So how does this impact me? What does this mean for life going forward? What is a war? Really basic concepts. And I think that's a really important place to start. For military families, you might be thinking about like, okay, does that mean that my parents are now getting deployed or big brother, big sister's getting deployed? What does deployment look like? How can I stay in touch with them? How can I support them? And I think it's like distilling it to the hyper local level for the kids is like, how does it affect children? And then, like I mentioned, okay, now we have to have a conversation about geopolitics. This is where Iran is. This is where the people are. There's people there. Just like you go to school every day, there's kids in Iran who go to school every day. But now they're also having to deal with the war. And then depending on their age level, you could talk about like how those kids might feel unsafe at school. And then I always try to give, especially the young people in my life, like, here's ways that we can support. I want to recommend a resource, the Iranian Diaspora Collective. It's an incredible organization that my friend Moj works on that kind of talks about what's happening. They started out with talking about the murder of Mahsa Amini with the Iranian morality police in September 2022. And now they're talking a lot about the war in Iran. And I think that's really important because we want to bring it to the people. The really beautiful thing with social media, as much as it is a hellscape, is that we're able to get in touch or at least see people and what they're going through. And I think that's a great resource for adults.
It's true. Like we can actually, it's not anymore like, here, let's go get this old book from the library. I mean, gosh, bless libraries. But like you were really stuck with what you could find. Like,
yeah, like you had an encyclopedia passage. So now we have that, and we can see the people, and we can see what, what everybody's doing and things like that. And just try to make it less abstract. Because I think one thing, and I was just talking about this today at at UC Irvine, was about how war and oppression is all about making people less human, us versus them. And I think that it must be really hard for military families because you're like, well, here's who we're fighting, but also those people are people and they have families just like us. And it's like, towing that line. And
to them, where like one of the things, that I try to draw to is like, I hope that the people, right, that when we go somewhere else, that we're also seen as people. Right, like that, because to someone we are the enemy, right? Like we also are doing.
That's a huge thing to mention. It's just like give them a 360 view of what the situation is. And then I think the other thing that I like to ask kids is to like, this is where you get to really honor their childhood. Like for, I think young people, even if they're going through difficult things, their world can feel a lot less complex than an adult world, but to them it feels just as complex. And we want to let them feel like they have a sense of power. So what would you do if you were a leader? Or even like what my parents would always do for me, because I was this very like, let me take all the action, let me do all the things type of kid. And so my parents would be like, okay, well, what do you want to say to your leaders? And I'd be like, well, I really want President Bush to know da 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 da. And then my parents were like, you can actually write him a letter. So I think that's the other thing, is to like involve young people in the systems of change. You can encourage them to call their, local lawmakers, because if you're calling DC and a staffer hears a child's voice, I bet you they're going to put on their customer service and they're really going to make that a good experience. Or you can leave a message if you're concerned about that, or just let them write a letter. What does that do? It teaches them how to address an envelope, an essential skill. It helps them practice their handwriting, and it gives them a sense of power and autonomy in what they're doing. Or do you want to write a letter to a kid in Iran? You might not be able to mail that over, but you get to see like where their head's at. And that's a really good exercise to do with children too. And so I learned about this a lot when I was supporting my sister when her family had to move in with us following the Eaton fire here in Altadena, and talking to my 6-year-old niece. She's 6 years old now, but she would be asking me, she's 6, and she's asking me really complex questions like, how come all my Black friends' houses burnt down but none of my white friends' houses burnt down? And then I have to talk to her about systemic racism, because I don't want her leaving that conversation feeling like there's something wrong with Black people's houses where they burn down easier. That's not true. But those are the types of conclusions sometimes kids come to. So instead, I'm talking to her about, okay, now how do I talk about systemic racism to a child? Okay, well, a long time ago, before I was born or you were born, there were these people and they made these laws, and the laws were not fair to everyone. And they said that the Black people have to live over here and the white people have to live over here. And they said that the white people were better than the Black people. But that's not true, because everybody is equal. Black people are good, white people are good, all people are good. And they all deserve to live in nice places, but that's not what ended up happening. And then we talk about like the systemic response and things like that, and how, in these communities, and I'm working at a law firm now that's suing Southern California Edison, whose electrical tower started the Eaton fire. So I'm like, okay, now how do I explain corporate negligence to this child?
Well, so this is what happens to me. It's like, I feel compelled that they know all these things, right? Because also we're in this moment where like education and knowledge are also being pushed aside. So as a mom, mine happened to all be 3 white boys. It's like, I feel very important to me that they hear about the nuance constantly, and not even the nuance, right? Like that they understand that this problem was born of a moment in which this power was abused, right? Or
And
that
you know
they were
what?
taken advantage of.
I think the other thing for parents of white children is that you don't want them feeling like, oh, it's my fault. And this is something
Yes,
that is
that's
in
the thing.
parallel with other communities too. Like if you're talking about deportations and how that has disproportionately impacted Latino communities, you don't want kids coming away from it feeling like there's something wrong with me because I'm Latino. You don't want Black children feeling like there's something wrong with them because they experienced slavery. And you don't want white children feeling like there's something wrong with them because, you know, white people were in
Right, we're in
positions
the
of
positions of
dominance.
power, right? Because that's not
and
going to get us
perpetuated white
anywhere in the
supremacy.
future.
And I get so upset with the conversations that are happening in places like Florida because they're trying to get rid of, you know, Black History Month, Women's History Month, with the claim, well, we don't want boys feeling bad about themselves. We don't want white children feeling bad about themselves. Black parents don't want white kids feeling bad about themselves.
Correct.
You know, and that's not the goal of this work. And it just, they're using that as a cover because it threatens systems of power, because what it ends up doing is raising children, including white children, to feel like they shouldn't participate in those systems. And that really, you know, goes against these systems of power when these kids are like, no, I actually want to make sure that when I grow up, I treat everyone fairly. Because that's how we end up with amazing people in our lives. You know, so many of my friends were kids who were like, okay, well, I saw how other people didn't get treated fairly, and I said, I'm not going to be part of that. When I got arrested at a protest back in 2016, it was a Black Lives Matter protest. I was in that, you know, that van that they take you from the protest to the prison.
Yeah.
And it was me, one other Black woman, and I think 12 white women. And they were all like, well, I'm not going to be part of this. You know, I'm not going to be part of these systems of harm. That's very threatening to any society that wants to maintain oppression if you're raising children that know about our history and know about our present. And that's why it's so important to give those kids a 360 view about, hey, yes, those kids in Iran, they deserve to go to school safely just like you do. And they might think that we're the enemy same way that our news is talking about them. And like, that's the best armor you can give a child is to see other people's humanity. And it's really hard to do. But in seeing other people's humanity, they must also see their own humanity. And they must also see what they can do to contribute to a better society, and to not feel like they're a part of a problem, or that they're a part of a class of people who should be villainized.
Right, or that it's like something they can't do anything about, right? Like, or even, I mean, one of my worries is I don't want them to feel bad, because that's a crack then that you can get in and say, see how they make you feel bad about who you are. Do you know what I mean? Like,
and then suddenly they're on the incel message boards or a podcast. Yeah. And I think, you know, I know a lot of mothers of sons who are really, you know, intent, especially like feminists who are raising sons. They want to make sure that their children aren't falling prey, because all of these, you know, incel podcasts that are really trying to, like, you know, have this talk, people like Andrew Tate, what they're doing is preying on the insecurities of young men and boys. Even there's this thing called looks maxing that's really like, you know, it's doing what the 2000s era did to so many women and girls for boys now. I saw a video of a young man trying to fracture his cheekbones so that way he could build up scar tissue to make his jawline more chiseled. But then you see all the pictures of these looks maxing, and it's like, that's just puberty. Y'all just had puberty. So you have all these like grown men selling supplements, selling this perfect vision of what you're going to look like to attract women, but they're just going through puberty. So like, it's so heartbreaking, because I know I went through that as a girl in the 2000s. And so the way that we protect our children, because, you know, I have a lot of, you know, sexual trauma that came up for me after I had my baby, which is something that can happen after you go through a birth experience, because it, you know, involves so much of that same part of your body as a lot of sexual trauma. And so I've been going to therapy. And one thing and it's also been difficult to see the constant, you know, Epstein files. And I have this daughter that I want to protect. And I want to say, I'm never going to let anything bad happen to her. But I know that's not something I can ultimately control. Like, I can't control everything that ever happens to my daughter. But what I can do is arm her with the knowledge of how to protect herself, to know that her body belongs to her, and that I'm a safe space that she can come to. And I think that's been one of the most healing things for me, is just to know that, like, as a parent, as an adult in these young people's lives, I can be that safe space for them, that they can know that they can come to me if something does happen, or if they're afraid that something will happen, because it's so easy to get into this spiral of, how do I save them? How do I save them? But I think the way that we help the way that we save people is to show them that they can save themselves, to empower them instead of try to be their savior.
And the greatest gift, like you said, that we can give them as parents is to be like, no matter what happens, I'm here. Good, bad, I'm here. We will get through it together, right? Like I can't guarantee the outcome, but I'm a safe space. This may be a cheesy question, but I do want to leave listeners with kind of a call to action. What do we owe ourselves, our kids, our community when it comes to self-education?
Ooh, this is so important. Okay, so a great example for me in my life is, so I grew up really privileged, you know, 2-parent household, dual incomes, and like things like the financial crisis of 2008 didn't really impact my community. So we were, you know, pretty well to do. In fact, in one of the houses nearby, the banker for one of those banks that failed lived in the community. So, you know, different context to my husband. You know, his father's a teacher, his mother is a grocer. They, you know, live in the Midwest. They were very much impacted by the financial collapse. We just had different paradigms. Like I had my first laptop when I was 10, or my first computer when I was 10. He didn't have his first computer till he was in high school. One thing in our relationship was how class was showing up. I had a lot of class privilege. He did not have a lot of class privilege. He actually had a lot of trauma from, you know, growing up impoverished. And so my responsibility in this relationship, what I owe my husband, who this was before we got married, is to work through my classism, work through my, you know, misunderstandings, my, you know, the false stories that I've taught myself or that I've learned about class, about different positions. So that way I don't act in a way, right? We have to work on the internalized. So that way I don't act in a way that, you know, perpetuates those harms. So I'm not being tone deaf. So I'm not saying things that sound privileged or out of pocket, but also so I'm not exacerbating any of the trauma that he's sealing through. I think so that's like a class example. But I also think it's like, okay, how can we show up for, I think in 2020, when my platform, you know, totally took off, that's how Smarter in Seconds got started, was it was a lot of people who were like well-meaning white folks who were like, oh, I did not realize the depth and breadth of racism until I was forced to log off from every distraction that exists and bore witness to the murder of George Floyd. Okay, now what do I owe? A lot of catching up work to do, a lot of self-learning. And I think that's why a lot of people found my page, because a lot of those folks are like, okay, my bad, didn't realize it was so bad, but now I know. So where can I go? Where can I improve? And I think the other thing is, it's just like a constant humility, a constant checking in with yourself, but not expecting other people to call you out first. And that requires the time and energy to be introspective. Introspection is not really something that we learn, you know, and I think that's another thing that we can
not really an American value.
It's not an American vibe. I mean,
it needs to be.
I didn't realize how much of an American thing it was until I think I was in Egypt and we were watching the news, and we were on our honeymoon, and they were talking about like trade relations between Saudi Arabia and South Africa. And part of me was like, why isn't America involved in that?
Yeah,
just subconsciously. Because I'm like, I'm sorry, 2 nations that aren't me are doing trade relations without us. And you don't realize how, you know, that American bias comes in, but individualism, all these things are so intertwined. And so it's like trying to have this communal sense of like looking outside of yourself. And so I think with children, teaching that is so important. You know, like, well, my mom used to do this with me all the time. Well, how do you think they felt? Or how do you think they would feel if, you know, you didn't invite them to your birthday party? Like, it might not feel like that matters to you, or maybe you had an argument with them, but if you're inviting your whole class, but you're not inviting her, how might she feel? And like, I hated it because I was like, no, I don't want to think about anybody but me. I'm a kid, you know?
Yeah,
but starting those skills early is great, because then we don't end up with adults who are sitting there like, oh man, now there's a baby crying on the plane and I'm upset, instead of thinking about that baby's probably uncomfortable. You were a baby once
like the
too.
mom, think about the parents.
All those different things.
I had this because we're military, we've moved around, and we were stationed in Japan. Now we're in Hawaii. But I was in Japan, and I was at the Postal Museum with my children, and we're looking at stamps from all over the world. And there's a section in the US, and we're pulling it out. And next to the US is a section of Hawaii stamps. And I say out loud to the kids, weird, maybe Hawaii stamps are like so uniquely beautiful, right? And I pull them out, and as I'm looking, I'm like, no, it is because they were their own country. Like, these are of their queen, they had their own postal system. And in the moment, just realizing how undereducated I was. Like, I knew that Hawaii had been occupied and we had taken it, right? But not really in this. There was something about understanding that they had a postal system with stamps that just like, you know, and then having to turn, I was like so embarrassed, right? To then have to turn to the kids. But it has become this moment, like the kids call it like the postal museum moment. As we are learning other things, I homeschool my kids. And as we're learning other things, the kids will say like, oh, I'm having a postal museum moment. And so it's like, I gave them this gift of seeing something that I had grossly misunderstood, not because I wanted to, or I didn't value the people of Hawaii, because it had just never occurred to me or been presented to me. And then of course, after we had this, it's like we went home and we Googled all this stuff and we got books and read about it. And now we're here. And I feel like it has definitely enabled us to like more engage with the situation here and like the presence of the military, which is us, and how people might, when they encounter us, the initial feelings that they have, and which is fair, right? Like, I just feel like it has given us this whole new way to interact with the world, and letting the kids see that it can happen to their mom, who, like, I read, I think I'm pretty educated, I think was a really good thing for them to see that like we have a lot to learn too, and we can change. And even day to day, I'm still making errors in this that I'm learning about,
I think that's such a beautiful gift that you've given your children, the ability to see an adult learning in real time. And I find myself doing that too, like, being around my niece. I'll say something, so maybe I say something like body shaming about myself. And I go, oh, well, let's have a reframe. I just said this about it, but it's really okay. Or flat stomachs don't mean it. Just really trying to like reframe it and stuff. Or she'll say something to me that like activates me. And I'm like, okay. Like, so when I was pregnant, it was something we were talking about, like size, and I was really big. And I think I said like, I was in the other room and she caught it because, right, kids, they see and observe everything. Everything. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I can't wait till I'm not fat anymore, or something like that. And she was like, Blair, you're not fat, you're pregnant. And I was like, that's right. But also, if I was fat, that would be okay, because it's okay to be fat, and and I was just like really trying to diffuse it. And sometimes you can like overcorrect, like when you're trying to over apologize, and they're like, what are you doing? Chill out, But I think it's so important that you show them, like, sometimes I might say something that's wrong, but I think that's so great. Also, because you're talking about how people might perceive you or encounter you, as a white, American military family in Hawaii. Is so that way they're not like, oh, well, when I was in Hawaii, the locals were really like standoffish to me, or something like that.
Yeah.
They can say, oh, well, there was a lot of distrust that we had to work through. And that way they're forearmed with awareness. The same thing was for me, Dr. Sarah Alwebquay mentioned, who talks about colorism. Her whole platform is called Colorism Healing. And she has like a whole suite of resources. But I remember for my mom, she wanted me to understand, as a lighter skinned Black person, how sometimes people might be like a little hesitant around me if they're darker skinned Black folks. And that gave me the awareness of like, oh, okay, so this is how I can show up better and like,
yes, exactly,
hold space for that distrust and work through it, instead of just feeling like, oh, they don't like me or there's something wrong with me. And then, because I see adults who didn't have that conversation, who, really struggle with having conversations around colorism as lighter skinned people, or take up space in that conversation instead of being able to hold space for people who are actually harmed by the system.
Yes, yeah. And no, I mean, for us, this is such a good example, because for us here, it's like asking for I now know that every place here had a, native, a Hawaiian word that means, so being able, when we're in those spaces, saying like, oh, do you happen to know the Hawaiian word, and what does that mean? Because they all have these beautiful meanings, right? And that is so important to understanding the role of the land and regaining some of that power. But I think if you don't know to ask, or you didn't take the time to educate, like you say, it's very easy to be here and be like, it was tough to be here because they didn't want us,
Yeah. Instead of being like, now I have a rich and deep understanding of the history and why, and then also how you can show up better. And how cool is it going to be for your kids when they're in college or whatever, and be like, yeah, we lived in Hawaii, and somebody might be like, and what was that like? And they're like, well, actually, I learned a lot about the Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian people. And then they can have this richer discussion. And I think that's so cool, because like, I think about my little baby and how there's so much that I want to like show her in the world. And I was listening to Creed, and it's like, I'll show you everything with arms wide open. I love karaoke. But I was thinking about that and I was like, oh, how sweet that, I won't be able to show her everything, but I want to show her as much of the world as possible. And when I was a kid, we would always go to museums. And that was how I understood the world. And my dad was always with the fun facts. Like Smarter in Seconds is 100% the product of my parents and me in my childhood, because he would like make the gate code. Like the gate code is the year the Declaration of Independence.
That's what we do. Yes. The code to the iPad is always some date they need to know.
Some historical thing. And then you got to look it up. And back then I'd have to go to the library. I'd have to look it up because my dad would be like, okay, well, if you're coming home today, I changed the gate code. The gate code is this year. Now you have to try to find it. And it was like this scavenger hunt, and it made me love learning. And I think that's the best gift you can give, because you can't send your kids off to college with every answer about everything, but you can teach them how to think.
Blair, this has been so wonderful. If our listeners want to get smarter in seconds, how do they find you?
You can find me at Blair Imani. That's BLAIRIMANI. I am on Threads, having a hoot and holler. I am on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. Reluctantly, but I'm there. And I'm on YouTube Shorts. And I also have my book, Read This to Get Smarter. So like what I like to say is that Smarter in Seconds is your snacks, but if you like want to sit down and have the meal, that's my book, Read This to Get Smarter. But I also have a podcast with my friend Michael Threeds, who is the new host of Reading Rainbow, the internet's beloved librarian. And our podcast
We're huge fans on the show.
Oh, Michael would be great for this show as well.
So great. All right. Well, that's our show. Subscribe, leave a rating and review, and tell your friends. If you want more parenting advice, you can find Karen Feeding the Column on slate.com. Karen Feeding is produced by Cheyna Roth and Rosemary Belson. Micah Phillips is our video producer. Mia Lobel is executive director of podcasts for Slate. And Ben Richmond is senior director of podcast operations. Thanks for listening, and take care.
If you want more no-nonsense advice about parenting, relationships, money, and everything else life throws your way, sign up for the Slate Advice newsletter. A special thanks to our Slate Plus members. If you haven't already, consider joining. Slate Plus members get unlimited access to all of Slate's journalism and help support our independent reporting.